Are fish treated well? That's going to be the topic of today's episode. Have you ever thought about the welfare of fish, either in wild-caught fisheries or aquacultured fisheries? Not a topic that we think about often. We also think about the welfare of like us as seafood eaters and sustainable seafood eaters, and making sure that we're eating the right seafood and making sure that some of those fish are not being exploited and being sold fraudulently. Having, hey, I want to eat sea bass, but it's actually tilapia. Or I want to eat tuna, but it's actually a shark that has a lot of carcinogens in it. So there's a lot of stuff that goes around the seafood industry, and we got to make sure that we are treating these animals properly. So we're going to talk to Wasim Imam, who is the founder of the Ethical Seafood Research Organization. You can find more information at ethicalseafoodresearch.com. We're going to be talking to him about the welfare of fish. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, marine biologist and science communicator, here to tell you what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. Now, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the welfare of fish, because that's something that we don't talk about on this episode a lot, because I think when people think of fish, they just think about food. Like, fish is food. That's how we think about it. We catch fish whenever we really see fish, unless it's at an aquarium or in your own aquarium. You look at it and you're just like, it's on a plate. You know, if I look up salmon and I look up on the internet, I Google search it, you're going to see salmon on a plate. You're going to see how delicious salmon is and how you can, different ways of cooking and all the different recipes, but you're not really going to see a lot of salmon just underwater. We don't think of how they feel, that they feel pain, what they have to go through in their lives. Mother Nature can be quite cruel to fish, especially schooling fish, or they're getting eaten by a lot of different predators and so forth. When we talk about how humans interact with fish, a lot of times welfare is not really brought up in the regular conversation, because we just think of them as food. We don't think that they feel pain, but they do. And that welfare needs to be addressed. And I have on the podcast today Wasim Imam, who is the founder of Ethical Seafood Research. He talks about his life growing up, wanting to be involved in marine conservation, then finding just a different path, going all over the world for schooling and stuff, including Canada, here in Toronto, not far from where I grew up, and being able to start an organization because, he wants to make sure that there are some set standards and people are following the set standards on fish welfare. And so I think it's really important to have that conversation. So Wasim is here to talk about that. So here is the interview with Wasim Imam, talking about ethical seafood research and fish welfare. Enjoy the interview, and I'll talk to you after. Hey Wasim, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about the welfare of fish?
Yes, I'm really excited about this. Yeah, I've been waiting for this for a while now since we touched base.
Absolutely. So, yeah. I'm super excited about this. This is a subject matter that we don't go into often on this podcast, and I think it's kind of a bit of a shame that we don't, because it's something that we need to talk about more. We're going to be talking about fish welfare and looking at the fish and ethical seafood and all that wonderful stuff. And so there's going to be a lot of questions, but before we get into all of that, Wasim, why don't we talk about a little bit about you? Why don't you let us know about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and actually, that's exactly why I'm excited about this, because I appreciate that this is not the typical topic from what I've heard of your previous episodes.
Right.
So thank you for having me. So I'm an aquatic ecologist. Everything I've ever done has involved fish in one way or another. I then got into fish welfare a bit by chance. I'll talk about that a bit later on. But so I now describe myself as an aquatic ecologist by trade, but a fish welfare researcher. And I'm also the founder and executive director of a small nonprofit called Ethical Seafood Research, where we advocate for improving the welfare of aquatic animals in the food system, in the aquatic food system, obviously, particularly in Africa, but we do have operations and projects outside of that as well that I can touch upon during the recording.
Very nice. Very nice. This is really cool because, you don't meet a lot of people who are involved in welfare of fish, especially. There's welfare of like zoological animals, animals that are in zoos and things. I know there's a huge area of interest in that respect. But when we're looking at fish, we look at, obviously we look at, especially from farm fish and wild seafood, wild caught fish. There's also worries about pain and worries about how they're raised and how they're caught, and of course, so it makes sense, right? But I want to go back a little bit further before you got into this. As you said, you kind of came by happenstance in terms into this field. What originally drew you to being interested in fisheries, or even just in the ocean in general?
Yeah. So my origin story, as they call it, I was working with so I did my undergrad in Canada. One of my many nationalities is Canadian, so
Oh, nice. Where from?
Toronto.
That's like I'm right by you. Like that's hilarious. I live in
Oh.
Burlington. So I grew up in Toronto. That's awesome.
Okay. So actually, Burlington is one of the places I did work on fish with the Great Lakes.
Yeah,
Fisheries.
inland. Yeah, the inland waters. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. So that
nice,
was
nice.
another place where I cut my teeth a bit. But I
Yeah,
was working with the Ontario Ministry of the Environment in Etobicoke, if you know.
right. I know exactly where that office is. Yeah.
Yeah, so during my undergrad, I did like the co-op program,
Okay.
environmental science, and my third co-op placement, I was with the ministry there, and I was my title was biomonitoring technician. So I would be going out with the senior biomonitoring technician and biomonitoring scientist, I guess it was called, and I was helping him collect samples of fish from different areas of Ontario to sample levels of contaminants, and
Right.
that informs what used to be called the sport fish guide, like contaminant guide. Or it tells you like the safe levels to eat of fish caught from this area for pregnant women, for children, for older folk, and so on. And it was my first time ever really being out in an aquatic environment, like on boats. Yeah, maybe for like true Canadians, like where they grow up, like hunting
Yeah.
and fishing and stuff, it's
Yep.
not that like exciting. But for me, as like a newcomer to Canada, it was a completely
Yeah.
new thing to me. So being out like in the field, like working with fish, really, I just loved all of that. But on
Right.
top of that, I started realizing just how vulnerable fish were. So we would be wanting just a sample of 20 or 30 juvenile fish, but by seining, we were catching like hundreds. And as my boss was trying to like get the sample perfect, I was just trying to save all these fish that I was like, they're gonna die unnecessarily. And then I started realizing just how fish in inland water especially are so at the mercy of like human activities, and how we have the ability to like overexploit obviously I took it to the next level of oceans, but just in general, freshwater fish to me seem very vulnerable. That water
Yeah.
levels, they're at the mercy of the water levels being enough. They don't always have huge distances that they can escape, natural fluctuations and so on. Whereas, birds can fly, or, land animals might have. Obviously, I'm simplifying things, but that's kind
course.
of what got me thinking, like, oh God, these animals are actually quite vulnerable.
Yeah.
And for my master's, I then did another project where I looked at the movement behavior of tilapia through McGill University. They had a research station in Uganda.
Yep.
I tracked the telemetry. Using telemetry, I tracked the movement behavior of tilapia there, which is something that no one had done at the time. And I just loved this idea of radio tags and discovering the innate movement patterns and stuff about a species you don't know about. And from there, I continued with that. I worked for the FAO for a bit on fisheries and aquaculture, like sustainability and like at the policy level, global. But I didn't enjoy that work too much. But I got funding from NSERC in Canada to do a PhD.
So you're working for the FAO, but still while living in Canada? Because I know FAO, I always assume it's in Europe or like in Rome or something like that.
It is exactly.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
But you did it from Canada.
No, I actually had to move to Rome.
Oh, you had to move to Rome. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So, and even the funding that I got, the NSERC, like PhD funding,
Yeah.
they allowed me to take it anywhere. So I took it to Scotland.
Oh,
right?
so
and I did a PhD there with a group that was looking at aquaculture, and my supervisor there told me, "Hey, have you thought of animal welfare or fish welfare?" And I was like, "No, I don't really know what that is," and that's kind of what got me into this. So we can talk about that, but I was just giving you a high level sort of
I love it.
overview of my journey.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very interesting because like you did a lot of traveling. What made you first come to Canada to do the undergrad at University of Toronto, U of T?
Yeah, so my dad wanted to come to Canada from like when I was young. He said to me like, that's where the future is. I was in high school in England. I was in the UK, and
Okay.
it just Europe was always seen as like kind of still a bit struggling in the past, whereas the future is North America and there's like opportunities.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
yeah, and I think that there is a lot of truth in that, to be fair. Especially at the time. So when I moved to the UK for high school, it was the same year, same month, same week as 9/11, and you can imagine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I'm from the Middle East originally, so like,
Right.
I got used to some really like I don't think this is a definitely your
No,
audience
but I
maybe
mean,
not used to. Yeah.
It forms who you are, because these are like the I think that's what gets left out of a lot of people discuss when we discuss marine biology or anything marine conservation related is we leave out what's happened to people throughout throughout their lives. We are impacted by what's happening in our lives. Like the people right now in many places around, especially here in North America, we are impacted by decisions made by the US government right now. Whether we agree with them or not, we are impacted. Like there are people whose jobs in the States are impacted by what all the cuts that are happening at NOAA. And so it definitely shapes where we're going to go, where we're going to live, how we're going to be treated when we go to certain places. You go into the UK from the Middle East. And what country are you originally from?
Egypt.
So Egypt, right? Like very well educated, like a great, like in Egypt, like they have like, stable structure, like, history, culture. You go to a place like the UK during 9/11, you probably could have come to any place, like even the US or Canada, and then you look differently and you get treated differently, and not by, you were in high school, like, well, you didn't do anything. Your parents came over for what you say is like a better life. And so you get impacted by that. So never leave that out of your story, because that's who you are and what you've become. You know what I mean? Like, now
but actually, Andrew, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
but just
go ahead.
On that note, I do remember, and I always tell this anecdote because it stayed with me for so long. Like, I came back to the UK for Christmas, and I went back to Canada after my first semester or term university, and I had a PR card, right? So I was a resident, and the border guard in Canada, I don't remember, what do we call them? Like
the customs officer?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, the guy said to me, "Welcome home, sir." And I was like, "What? Oh my God." Like, that just felt like already a huge difference. Yeah. And that always built part of this kind of like feeling like you're part of something and you don't have to prove who you are. You can look like anything, and especially Toronto, right? Like,
well, Toronto's so multicultural. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off, but you were going to say something.
Well, what I was going to say is, like, as you grew up in that, like, in the UK in high school, and you're like, did you still have that interest? Like, for oceans, like you must have had, like, for freshwater or oceans, to come to U of T to do a degree. Was that the purpose? Like, you were coming, like, like you go from the UK to Canada to be like, okay, this is what I want to do. Better place, as you mentioned, like this is like going to North America for a better place. Were you always interested in oceans or aquatic life, even in high school?
So I actually think that came a bit later, and sometimes I do regret just that it took me that long for the penny to drop, let's say, because biology was always my favorite subject. But I didn't follow what I liked as much as what I was good at, and what I was really good at was business studies somehow. Like, I excelled at anything to do with business. Like, that was my top subject in the UK. So I thought, oh well, making money is good, and I was just thinking about that. I wasn't really in tune with my interests per se. And then when I actually moved to Canada, and I realized that business management was like actual very mathematical, very like financy, like I just didn't like it at all when I started. And I picked up the prospectus and I started thinking, well, what do I actually like? And I'm like, I've always liked sciencey subjects and sort of animals and biology and so on. It seemed like a no-brainer to change to environmental science with a focus on environment, like the aquatic domain especially. And then co-op shifted me very much in that direction, So that's kind of where I was a bit late in that sense, like wasn't in tune with what I truly liked. Yeah.
And I think it's a great part of your story too, because like you change, you realize you try something out in university, you literally go across an ocean to go try something in university, and you realize, well, hold on a second, I don't like this. I'm not this is not what I really wanted to learn, and then you switch. That's a big decision to do. Yeah. As a young man, like going into a new country, new university, and you're like, what the hell am I going to do? And then you find out, hey, I've always loved science, like, let's do it. And you graduated, and was this the program you went into this, you got a Bachelor of Science, but you went into environmental science and international development. That's a different, that's not your traditional, like, science, what you would think when people say, oh, you'd graduate with a science degree. International development's a big part of science, but not a lot of people put that together. What did you transfer into that program right away? Like, that's what was interesting, and why?
Yeah, so I think I was okay. You know what? I did more credits. I think you only have to do 20 credits to actually get a degree. I did
Yeah,
like
yeah.
23 or 24 credits. I
Gotcha.
just loved studying so much when I was at U of T that I kept taking like 6 courses every semester just because I was like
That's awesome.
modules. Yeah, I
Not
just
easy to
loved
do.
it.
6 is not
No,
easy to
no,
do. It's a
no.
lot of work.
Exactly, but also like just the idea that they have like in the summer you can take stuff and like and there was no limit per se as long as you were keeping on top of things. And electives is something that I really loved about North America that we don't have in the UK. We didn't have, some of my friends there couldn't take all these electives. I was just like taking random stuff, anthropology, linguistics, stuff that really shaped me, I think, and actually
Absolutely.
changed how I looked at things. But so I actually took like enough courses for 3 majors, but I could only declare 2. So I declared international development and environmental science, but I did also do a whole major in French just because I was like kind of obsessed with French, and
Awesome.
that did
And you're in
shape me.
Canada, you might as well, right?
Exactly, exactly. So that was a really, really, really nice part of the experience. So international development is it was when I looked at prospectus, I just thought this is really. I always wanted to work for the UN and like kind of do international type stuff because I traveled a lot as a kid. I was an expat in most places. I was born in Saudi Arabia to Egyptian
Okay.
parents, so like we had an expat community there already, and I just imagined that would be my future. And like international development spoke to me, I think. But
Gotcha.
when I kind of started taking the courses, I realized it's going to be hard to find a job or like easily. There's a lot of also it's like the kind of thing where you're learning about like poverty in places and you're learning about problems, but it's not always solutions, and it's a lot of
Right.
sort of
It can be heavy.
we've tried exactly
be
whereas
heavy.
I loved environmental science because if the soil is like has issues, you remediate it, you move on.
Yep.
Like there are solutions that are concrete, and I could get my head around those, and I felt like I could make an impact. And of course climate change was all the rage, it still is, but like
Still is, yeah.
yeah, and I felt like that's something huge that we really need to do something about. And so anything within the environmental domain was really interesting to me.
That's awesome. So you do this bachelor's. You start off with a master's. Is that what happened?
Yeah, so I got a scholarship to do something called Erasmus Mundus, which is for non-Europeans to come to Europe to do a 2-year degree, and it's always like a something joint between multiple countries. So mine was France, which obviously leveraged my French, English, UK, France, Germany, and Portugal. That was the 4 countries that were
Okay.
part of the consortium where I did my master's. But for my dissertation or thesis, I did my project through McGill because I had a contact there in the Stewart Biology department, and she had the field research station in Uganda. I was always like. I'm always someone who've had like lots of interests in different things and different
Yeah.
places and stuff. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. You move around a lot, and then you're like, okay, where am I going to go to next? It almost feels like that's what it feels like in terms of research, which is great for someone who wants to be interested. I think for me, I never traveled a lot. I always stayed in Canada. When I did my master's, I traveled a little bit. Like I lived in the States a little bit, but I never really traveled to Europe or Africa or Australia or anything like that to do science work. Which and that's like it's tough because like your comfort level may not be there. But if you're used to traveling, you're used to living in different places, then you're a little bit more open. And what I like about that is the freedom to be like, all right, I have this question for science that I want to be able to solve. Where is the best place to do it? So your field station might be, like you said, in Uganda, or your field station might be back in Canada somewhere, or in the UK or in Egypt. It just depends,
Totally.
right? To have that open mind of like, I've lived in a bunch of different places. I know what to expect there. I can go in and have my own, sort of cut my own teeth on this science, but also enjoy the adventure of going into a different place is great. Now, going to Uganda is a very interesting country because it's had its social problems itself in terms of, I mean, I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a civil war that broke out. When you went there, was there violence in certain parts of Uganda?
So, it's funny because as an Egyptian or someone originally from Egypt, you kind of grow up thinking that you're African and you're like, oh yeah, I'm African. But then when you go to real Africa, you realize that even they don't consider you African. Like everyone was treating you the same as like any other like non
Right.
like Ugandan person. And That was eye-opening because obviously I just mentioned that it was like on the receiving end of racism in previous parts of my life. So suddenly it's like,
Right.
hey, like, can you guys make up your mind? Like, am I this or am I that? You know, but no. So Uganda, no, actually, it felt extremely safe where I was. I was in a small village by one of the satellite lakes, near. It's called Lake Nabugabo. It's just outside Lake Victoria. So
Okay.
it was nothing at all like what I had maybe imagined. Well, it was really uninformed. All of my like images I had in my head were uninformed. But yeah, the
Right.
research station was very quiet. It was so tranquil by the lake. People were so nice. I just had a really good experience there, and that's why I kind of wanted to do more stuff in Africa in the future.
Oh, okay. Okay. Cool. I was just looking it up as you were mentioning that. I was just looking, making sure that because I think I was thinking of Sudan when I was thinking of wars that happened, and so I think they were involved in some kind of way, but I don't know exactly how they were. So I don't want to misstep and say the wrong
No, no,
country.
but
That's my
I
my
thought you were
ignorance.
I thought you were referring to like Idi Amin. Remember the last king of Scotland? You
Yes,
know,
yes. I think I was. I don't know a lot about the histories. I know like there was a war in '86 to '94, but I
yeah,
didn't know like I said the late '90s. So I think there was, but I think that had to do with the Sudanese civil war. So,
yeah.
but yeah, but regardless, I mean, you never know. You never know what you're going to expect in these countries. How did you enjoy staying there for your field season? Like, what was that like?
So it was an eye opener for sure. I'd never done tropical field work,
Yeah.
and I suppose the one thing I liked about it, because in Canada and like Europe and stuff where I'd done other stuff, like everything's so structured, like health and safety, this, like kind of they have a
Mm-hmm.
protocol, but like there, like you're kind of reacting to things on the ground that you haven't prepared for at all, and also no one really cares that much about certain things. They're like, you know what, you want this, yeah, you want a sample, we'll get you this fish.
Yeah.
Like whereas like I would have had to, jump through all these hoops.
Yeah.
So I think it's also a lot more real in that sense,
Mm-hmm.
and of course it taught me a lot about how what we I'd learned about all this fisheries stuff, but really seeing how the communities depend on that as a livelihood was really eye opening. Yeah, and
I can imagine.
how big a problem it is. What they call a tragedy of the commons. Like if it's not regulated, like everyone's just going to. I could see it happening in real life that. If someone doesn't catch it, someone else will catch it, and everyone is sort of trying to provide for their families in a subsistence way.
Yeah.
So it was a bit depressing that part, I would say, especially
Yeah.
like the Nile perch. How it was introduced to the Lake Victoria. I could see
Mm-hmm.
the effects, just the decimation of endemic populations in
Yeah.
the lake there.
It's one thing to hear about it like through literature and through other people. It's another thing to see when you see like an invasive species or an introduced species come in and wreak havoc into a lake that where you've heard so many things like great things about. It's we see it in the Great Lakes here with the Asian carp coming in, and you're just like,
Exactly.
they just destroy everything if they're in here, and so you worry
Abs-
about that. But there's one thing in seeing it, and there's one thing in just in hearing about it too. They're very very
Absolutely.
different things. Yeah,
Actually,
so that's
Andrew,
interesting.
since we mentioned Burlington and the Great Lakes Lab, that is a project that I was helping them with in 2012. Halfway through my master's, I did an internship with someone called Sue Doka. I don't know if you know anyone from the group
She
there.
used to be my boss.
Really? No
We must have missed
way.
each other by like we were in the same building.
Oh, no
I
way.
was in 2013. I was working
Okay.
for Nick Mandrak.
Yeah, oh, no way. He
Yeah.
was at UTS. He joined UTSC just as I was leaving Scarborough. Like,
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
okay.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
That is
So about
hilarious.
2012. Yeah. 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 That's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah,
Small
so
world.
I helped her with a few reports, her and her like group at the time, like Aaron and other people. But they had
Yeah.
this project with Nick Lapointe. I don't know if you know who that
Yep.
is. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I know
Oh,
Nick. Yeah.
yeah.
And Aaron was like my office mate.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. I didn't realize you were there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I live like a stone's throw away. Like I drive there like five
Crazy.
minutes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so funny.
Amazing. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I did a few months with them looking at like the carp. They had like a radio telemetry. No, radio? No, it's acoustic telemetry project in
yeah.
the harbor, and we were
Right.
looking at how to keep carp out of the um, main part of the lake, I guess, using these. They had these gates that they could like open and close. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
Mm-hmm.
my God, it's taking me
Yeah.
back. Oh, but yeah, it was. But it was carp that was a problem, and it still is. I
Yeah.
guess, right?
Still is. I mean, it's still, there's still, I think they found a few, but nothing like a major population or anything like that. I haven't kept up in the last few years, but I know they still do monitoring every year, and there's boats out every year to make sure they catch them and grab them if they see them. But they haven't seen too many things. They've sampled with like eDNA and stuff, and have found some samples of some that are there, the good, not the good ones. So because there's like Asian carp that are okay, and then there's invasive Asian carp, and so there's a bunch of different species, as you know, in there, and so they continue to monitor them.
But even common carp is like has wreaked havoc and.
Oh yeah, because they're so destructive, right? When they eat everything, and so they're so destructive that they can really take away habitat pretty quickly if they go through. Asian carp just seem to be a little bit more efficient at it, and so common carp are still bad, but they can. I don't think they're as bad as what we're expecting Asian carp to be. And there's so many rivers and streams that they can reproduce in, so it could be quite concerning, in terms of that invasive species. But yeah.
Yeah, of course. No, you're taking me back now. I haven't I know that word for a while.
No, but that's awesome. So like, and then you go, you do the work in Uganda. Was that when you were at University of Stirling? No, that was when you were at McGill.
That was, that project was through the McGill Research Center.
Gotcha.
Someone called Loren Chapman from there. I don't know if you know anyone from there. Oh,
No, I don't know anybody from there, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So she's an inland freshwater person too, and she had someone called Beth Nybor who was working with her, also Canadian. She's now at Virginia Tech, I believe.
Okay.
And so from there, after that, I got the FAO work. So I came back to Canada for a bit. I was applying for jobs, and it was mostly consulting work that I was getting.
Yes,
and
a lot of consulting,
Yeah, I didn't want to get into consulting, the big, sort of environmental services and so on. So when the FAO thing came up, I was like, yeah, definitely. It was a consultancy, but it took me to headquarters for a year and a bit. I did different roles there with fisheries mostly, and then I joined so do you know like RFMOs, how they work, right?
Yes.
So I'm used to people who actually don't know anything about my field.
Yeah.
So like I have to like recalibrate and be like, no, Andrew actually knows a lot about this.
Well, why don't you just tell the audience like what it stands for? Because we've talked about it on the podcast before, but just to make sure that they completely understand, it's like regional
Fisheries management organization.
Yeah.
So the whole, all of the seas and oceans of the world are divided into areas by the UN or by other bodies, and they're all managed by these organizations that are responsible for kind of bringing countries, member states of that region together to make decisions mostly about fisheries, like how like safe levels to catch of different stocks, and they kind of help mediate between countries a bit. The majority of them have a lot of issues because countries just don't agree on so many things, and there's no real
stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Holding them like accountable is also very hard. Like you can't force them to stick to their promises. So I worked in the RFMO. I actually worked in two RFMOs. One in Thailand. Well, the one for Southeast Asia, the coordinating body for the Southeast Asia was called. That was before my master's. But I worked after my master's in the Mediterranean one called the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean, the GFCM. Which is, by the way, the worst managed body of water in the world. Ironically or unironically, I don't know.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah.
So much mismanagement. Actually, Spain and Italy used to be, I believe they still are, the worst culprits for like overfishing and just even marine pollution and a bunch of stuff, and discarding fishing gear. They're like it's a bit of Wild West in some areas.
Well, and it's like there's no, I just discovered this recently. I didn't know a lot about the Mediterranean in terms of management. But there's no you know how every other country has like an exclusive economic zone. There's really no exclusive economic zone because there's so many countries that are there. All of them overlap. So it's pretty much just like treated as international waters. So you can do whatever you want, and there's nobody there to help you. And hopefully the High Seas Treaty that just came in recently as of this recording, like this past weekend, hopefully there's going to be some management coming from there, and those countries can agree. But it's a mess in there. Yeah.
Totally. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I was sort of marginally involved in, but like that was the all like the talk of the town when I was at the FAO was the Port State Measures Agreement, which
Okay.
like was gonna basically because IUU fishing. I guess I have to
Yep.
define that illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. That there's so much of global fishing goes undocumented and unregulated, and that's a
Right.
problem obviously for the UN and for just trying to manage fisheries globally. Um, they were very excited about this idea that if all the ports around the world signed up to the agreement, that they'd have to, make sure that everything that comes in is documented. That would be a way, to combat IUU fishing. So because nothing can be landed, as long if you can't land it, then it can't. That's kind of solving it at not at source, but at like
Yep.
sort of a source because
Yeah,
you're
for
allowed it
sure.
to come in. Yeah, so that was, and I think that got ratified, but then somehow I haven't heard about it since, really, which is an indication that probably it didn't end up having the impact it should have had, or maybe not enough countries ratified it. The High Seas Treaty was another one, but that's a different ministry, a different organization. Is that UNEP or is it the
I'm not sure who
ENJ?
manages that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It might be UNEP.
Okay. Yeah, no, just remembered that Port State Measures because it was like everyone was so excited about it. But, a lot of the UN stuff is like that. I think on paper and in theory, it's all very nice. But like SDGs is so nice, beautiful, poetically kind of meaningful. But, we just kind of crap all over that. Not we, but
Yeah,
the
no, I get
countries.
it. Like, look, you're preaching to the choir here because I've said this for years, where it's like when you have international agreements like this, it's they're nice to have, and there are certain countries who will follow it, and they take pride in following it, and they take pride in getting it, and or being a part of it. And then if they don't, they get embarrassed because of it. And so some countries work on, I don't want to get embarrassed, so I want to be able to keep this. And other countries now, these days, seem like, well, I don't even care about it, or I'll pull out of it because we don't want to be, we don't want to pay. But others will like, oh, I'll be a part of this if you let me do this. It's a little bit of a negotiation tactic, for certain times. So they become important, but there's definitely a game to be played with those, and enforcement is never easy, especially in international waters. So that could be a difficult thing.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we could have a whole
Oh, 100,
discussion
yeah.
about that. Yeah.
Absolutely. But like so what after FAO, you kind of come across like
Animal
welfare of
welfare.
fish, right?
Yeah.
So how did that all come about? How did that cross your
Yeah.
life, I guess?
So there was a group at the University of Stirling in Scotland. They had a project from the British Council and the department, what used to be called the Department for International Development in the UK. Now it's been combined with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, so it's called the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office now.
Okay.
But it used to be separate department or ministry, as you might call it, and they had funding for 2 years to try out this project in Egypt. It was the Institute of Aquaculture at Stirling, yeah, and they hadn't done anything in Egypt before, but the idea was very, very kind of experimental but exciting. So there's something called behavioral fever, which is like the phenomenon that fish that are sick. Of course, fish are ectothermic, so they can't control their temperatures. But just like reptiles and amphibians and so on, they've been known to seek out warmer waters when they're unwell. So it's like a thermoregulation or kind of a fever
Right.
behavior. Yeah, so they kind
Yeah.
of
Be
so
more comfortable.
exactly. And actually, if in experimental setups, if you give fish that thermal gradient to choose from, and they're sick, and you infect them, they do recover faster in the presence of the thermal gradient. So we know that is a concept that works, at least in theory and in experiments. But we were thinking, can we apply that to a sort of low intensity aquaculture system as a way to help fish recover, without using medicines and so on. Obviously, it was very ambitious. So we tried to recreate these thermal gradients in ponds in Egypt. That was a project that I was part of. So it was called well, it's called Balti Egypt, the official name. It's like a
Okay.
very long name, but like kind of behavioral prophylaxis as a way of
Right.
like improving health and welfare, sustainability, blah blah blah. But the part that I was focused on, my supervisor said to me, "Why don't you go assess the welfare of fish in these ponds and like come up with recommendations and like a protocol for how to assess welfare better?" And I was like, "Welfare, animal welfare? I didn't know anything about it." So
Right.
I started reading about it, and I was like, because it used to be something like very veterinary, like from the veterinary world or from, terrestrial livestock, and like you said before, pets, wild animals. It was like I knew the term, but I didn't really know what it meant. But I realized it was whole fields of research on like the five domains and the five pillars and all the
Yeah.
frameworks for assessing it and how do you know if animals are doing well. And I realized that fish welfare was like growing and people were more and more interested in it. And I could see more funders also being interested in this area. So I was like, maybe it's actually a good opportunity. So through the research, I started thinking about tilapia, which are very neglected. Well, that's a word that is now bandied about. Like there was no protocol for how to assess the welfare of tilapia. No one really knew what the behavioral needs were. We're slowly starting to know more and more, but they are one of the species that are farmed in the greatest numbers in the world and consumed as well. So through that, actually, and then after that, I was encouraged by a funder to basically start my own organization in Egypt because they were like, hey, actually, this is right after COVID where there was a lot of funding. The stock markets were doing amazing. A lot of these
Yeah.
foundations had, like, they were flush with cash. And someone was like,
Right.
hey, how do you feel about, like, trying to start up your own thing? And it wasn't my dream of mine, but I could see a gap, and I thought, well, I'll try it. And okay, I guess we tried this. So we started with a small project, a scoping study, and from there on, it just kind of grew. I can talk a bit more about that, but I was just sort of giving it a high level.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, like, obviously, you look at the what you mentioned as the basic project, looking at how fish will take care of themselves throughout a water column, or whether they're in an aquaculture facility or whether they're in the wild, they have to survive, right? And a lot of times when we look at fish, we just see fish. We see them either as seafood or we see them as like a cool looking fish, but we don't often see their character. Like even in an aquarium, you can look at a fish, but you'll see probably a school of fish. You may not see one, unless they're really big, like a grouper or something. You won't really see their personality or their characteristics, even though each fish has their own personality or characteristics, whether it's how they demonstrate it in a school of fish, how they demonstrate it as an individual. They all have their own unique kind of characteristics, just as I discovered, as any animal does, right? You look at a zoo, they all have their own characteristics, and they have their kind of funny quirks and things like that as they're influenced throughout their life. Like, for instance, I was doing the podcast for the Toronto Zoo here during COVID, and one of the things that I learned is that their head gorilla, like their troop leader gorilla, Charles, who was like a 25-year-old silverback, or even older, like he was maybe in his like 40s or 50s, silverback, like big gorilla, like can pretty much rip somebody's arms off if he really wanted to. And he was afraid of frogs. Like fully afraid of frogs. Like wouldn't let the troop go near a frog because like he was afraid of it. And so like, they all have this characteristic, but when we look at fish, like we could look at a whale and we can see the characteristics. Like we look at an orca and we're like, oh wow, these are really intense. We look at fish, we don't see that. We don't, like, and this is anybody, not just scientists, but we look at them and they're just like, they kind of look not dead in the eyes, but they don't look like they're looking at you. They don't look like they're really engaging with you. And especially like a fish like tilapia, which we normally just see as seafood, like you see, like they have to take care of themselves. They have to survive from a very basic level. And so their welfare as a survivor is going to be important. If they're sick or hurt, they're going to want to go to a place where they feel comfortable. Like we go to bed if we have a flu. If they're sick, they need to go get warm, like you mentioned, so that they can get better again. Now, whether the warm allows them to heal or whether the warm allows their body not to worry about one more factor as the cold, and then they can actually allow it to heal, like allow the rest of the body to do what it needs to do is another thing, which I'm sure is probably published on and so forth. But going into welfare is a really interesting idea. As you mentioned, you were like, I'm not a vet. Why would I go, first when you first think about why would you go? As you started to do this project more and more, did your mind open up a little bit more to like the world of welfare of fish, and where was it going? Like, what questions were you developing as you started to continue to do your PhD, and even after, when you're looking at welfare of fish just in general?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention though about this behavioral fever thing. Unfortunately, the project was actually like a huge failure. No, just because like
Oh no.
yeah, because we tried to like design these greenhouses like above parts of the pond, and we
Yeah.
thought, well, definitely like like a tarpaulin kind of like a cover,
Right.
or polyethylene, sorry, like it was gonna definitely warm up the pond, like that's
Of
how
course.
But then actually for some reason the data loggers that we used like consistently showed cooler. Maybe it was just like where the water level was in comparison to the height of like there was a whole kind of physics and dynamics, like
Of course.
thermodynamical stuff that we did not study before. We kind of assumed we did pilot it, but for some reason we were just running behind schedule, and we
Yeah.
kind of just these things always go wrong, like it's
It
always with
happens.
research
It
things.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So until now, I don't actually know what that would look like in a true aquaculture
Of course.
setting. Just to be fair, and you said something else about welfare. I was gonna say yeah. So a big part of my work now these days is on slaughter, how to slaughter fish better, how to reduce the suffering of fish at slaughter, in the context of aquaculture. Where large numbers are being caught or harvested, as they say. And it still shocks me because obviously I know because I've read literature that the fish are suffering when they get taken out of water, and I think most farmers or people who work with fish know. But the fact
Yeah.
that the fish don't make any sound makes it hard. Like if you're slaughtering, like when I've seen a cow be slaughtered in like Islamic ritual style, I'm like this is horrible. Like anyone can see it's horrible. Like the cow is trying everything to escape,
Right.
and most other land animals, but fish just kind of like flap about. I know it's still like if you're informed, it's not nice to see, but
Right.
the lack of sound sort of just doesn't resonate with us as humans, where we think sound must mean suffer, or suffering has to be
Yeah.
vocalized, right? So that's just
Yes.
something I thought of as we're saying that. But then I kind of, you actually asked me other questions, so maybe we can go back to those.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, I guess like as you start, just as you made these observations, when you finish off your PhD, you start to get more into this sort of welfare field of fish. Like, what was the next step? Like, what kind of questions arose after your PhD on the welfare? And I guess are those the questions that led you towards ethical seafood research?
Yeah. So I work with a NGO called Aquatic Life Institute. I'm not sure if you've heard of them.
I've heard of that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so they are US based, but actually their MD, their managing director, is Canadian she lives in BC. I think she also went to U of T and did environmental science background.
Probably.
Yeah. So I worked with them for a couple of years, and that was my first time in an NGO. I'd worked in the UN, I worked in the government in Canada, I worked in the government in the UK, I worked at like research settings, but never an NGO. Maybe just like small contracts. I even worked for the European Parliament at some point, but not
Oh,
like
wow.
yeah, that was a really fun role. But I guess I just learned about how NGOs work, and especially these like smaller NGOs or charities, where it was like they all had fancy titles and a fancy website and like fancy like even fancy branding and stuff. But then like when I actually started working for them, I was like, oh, you guys are just a bunch of people, like normal people, like me, like, and I realized just how accessible it was to something similar. That was always in the back of my mind. I'm like, well, I could do something like this, and I think it'd be fulfilling because I was passionate and I'm driven, but there's nothing as like fulfilling as working for yourself and like you're mission driven, I guess is the word,
Yeah.
right? Like that they
Yeah.
use. So it was back in the back of my mind. I was like, I think this is my calling, really, to pursue my own passion in a format of an organization. But I also started realizing just like how neglected the field was, how much suffering happens, and that there were technological solutions available. We could do something about it. So like what they say, they call it tractability. So I think we can actually address that issue. So the scale was large, the neglectedness was big, and there was something we could do about it, and that appealed to me. So I don't know if you're aware. I guess I'm referring to a framework that belongs to the effective altruism movement, and that's the people who fund most of our work and
Oh, okay.
most of the work of organizations like ourselves, such as
Right.
Aquatic Life Institute. So that's a movement that came out of Oxford University. It's philosophy driven. How do you do the most good in the most efficient way? And they managed to convince a lot of tech bros to part ways with a lot of money because they kind of like this idea, this framework, and because of that, well, our farm animal welfare is one of the areas that they care about. Normally, it's just very neglected, like underfunded, but because
Right.
they do the math and look at how many, like shrimp, for example, shrimp welfare is now receiving millions, if not more.
Which is crazy because you never would have thought of shrimp and welfare goes in the same sentence.
Exactly. So that's kind of just serendipitous. At the time that I was doing that research,
Yeah.
there was people wanting to fund that work. So yeah, it was opportunistic, but also I think it just made sense on many levels to me. To answer your question, I was trying to be brief, but then like since I started talking about neglectedness, I'm like, well, I might as well mention the movement and like the framework and stuff. Yeah.
Hey, this is a podcast. Nothing is a brief on this podcast. I am guilty of that myself because I talk a lot. One of the reasons why I started this podcast. So no need and worried about being descriptive because that's what we're here for. We want to learn about that. So tell me how ESR came about, like ethical seafood research came about.
Yeah, so my supervisor was always using this word responsible aquaculture or like
Yeah.
ethical. He obviously he wasn't a big fan of sustainable because it just lost meaning over the years, right? So the word ethical comes from him, very much him saying like, yeah, we can do things sustainably, but is it ethical to farm in this way or, when you think about the ethical dimension, I was like, interesting. I don't mean it in the same way as like, PETA, like, or PETA, like the...
Yeah.
Yeah, I just mean it in like a more...
It's not like an activism kind
it
of
doesn't
thing
have to
where
be.
you're
It doesn't have to
protesting.
be.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Like, we just ask people, even farmers, like your average farmer, like, do you think it's right to treat animals in this way? Not in an aggressive sort of accusative
Right.
way, but once you actually talk to them about like the suffering, they're like, yeah, you're right. I don't need to kind of throw them around if I can... Well, or they tell you, well, I wish I could do it differently, but this is like we're faced with these constraints. We don't
Well, and
ever go
I
in
think
there.
too, like it would seem like one thing that gets me too is a lot of times when you speak to farmers or like say a union of farmers or even fishers and things like that, a lot of the time there has been, I wouldn't say like scientific research, but there's been sort of like generational research like among farmers and fishers that look at what's the best way to kill the animal for the food, right? And a lot of them don't want the animals to suffer. They have if not a spiritual but more of an ethical approach to it where they're doing what they can, even though they're killing an animal, they're doing what they can to make it the fast thing. Now, I am not in this genre or this field, so I don't know if that holds true for everywhere, but there's a lot of people who do care about that. And I think it's interesting because I'm sure a lot of the conversations have come. It's like we tried this way, decades ago, and then we try it this way because it seems to be better. And maybe they don't know the scientific part of it, right?
Absolutely.
So that's where you come.
I agree completely, Andrew. Like your average farmer, your average fisherman, your fisher folk or fisher person, or whatever, wants to do right and do better. And when you don't shame them into it, you can have a very nice conversation about how things can be done differently and in a way that also doesn't hurt them. So I agree completely on that. I was just going to say about so then the word seafood obviously is self-explanatory, and research is, I just thought of it like I set it up as a consultancy, carrying out research to answer those questions because I saw it as a niche or a gap. Based on my skill set at the time. I didn't imagine to go down the non-profit route, but the problem was that there wasn't that many people who wanted to like hire a consultant to work on that. There was so few contracts coming our way, or like it was a bit limiting. So I thought, well, maybe if we move towards donations, can we get people to sympathize with fish in a way, or like fish and farmers, because using what they call the one welfare approach, like we're helping farmers, we're helping fish, we're helping the environment all in one, like it's a win-win-win, a triple win. So can we get people to support that cause? And it's something I have to say that I haven't got an answer to yet, because we've only really pivoted to being a full-blown charitable entity less than a year ago, and for now it's working out. But I had to shift gears because I didn't know anything about running a charity really. But the consulting idea came from when I was in the European Parliament. So I was with the Fisheries Committee there, and I was with a team that commissions. They have a budget that they have to spend every year to commission like studies to be carried out by consultants. And I was reviewing these contracts or like the reports that would come in, and I would sort of review it and summarize it for the parliamentary committee to not vote on, but kind of give feedback and if they want changes to be made. And I started seeing that I could be on the other side preparing those reports, and I thought that's what would be more interesting for me. And I started contacting people who the consultants that I was seeing their names. I'm like, hey, my contract here is running out soon. I'm really keen to get into the kind of work that you're doing. What would be an entry path into that? And one of them told me like you have to set up your own entity because it's much easier to apply for grants or contracts.
Right.
Register. So that's
not as like an independent consultant, but you have like this nonprofit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's where the idea of registering came, and then the name came from like kind of being inspired and also thinking it was a niche, but then actually transitioning to not applying for those kind of contracts, but actually going after like donations is something that came only a year ago because we set up in 2021 originally.
Right. So now, now that you've been running for 5 years now, say, as we just moved into 2026, you seem to have done you have had a lot of projects, and from all over the world, which is great. So can you talk a little bit about some of the projects that you have worked on, even just from an overview standpoint, just so people can get a perspective of what kind of animal welfare are you looking at and what other people are looking at to get your services?
Cool. Yeah, of course. So I always say when I give presentations and conferences, I always say we are a nonprofit advocates for improving aquatic animal welfare, blah blah blah. And then I always say like three key pillars. Obviously, research is in our name, but we also do like training and education. That's always like the backbone of anything we do. We're trying to improve practices, so there's always a lot of training workshops being held in the background. And then more and more now we're doing policy work, or like sort of governmental like high level work with the government. So we helped. One example is that we're a bit opportunistic, I should say this, just to be clear. So, if there's an opportunity there, we'll seize it. And we were invited by the government in Zanzibar. I was living there at the time. So Zanzibar is a semi-autonomous island, a group of islands, archipelago off the coast of Tanzania. And I was there in 2023, in January to March, on some kind of residency. And I formed a relationship with the government there, the Ministry of Blue Economy and Fisheries, they call it. And they invited me. They were like, "Hey, we need a new aquaculture strategy. Do you think this is something you can help me with?" And I'm like, "Help us with?" And obviously, it wasn't something that I'd done, but I was like, "Well, I'm sure I can." So I went away, applied for funding. I, talked to some consultant friends of mine. Together we thought the best way of doing it. And sure enough, we went away and delivered it in collaboration with them, and that's been adopted as official strategy for the islands for the next. Well, it was 2025 adopted, so 2038. So it's a 13-year strategy, and that will determine the direction that the islands go. Now, this is because they're really keen to exploit the blue economy. All of Africa and many developing regions, are keen, blue economy. The World Bank pushes hard on blue economy, but actually, when we were carrying out the stakeholder consultation and developing the strategy, we realized that Zanzibar is very well suited to seaweed farming. They already do a lot of seaweed. And moving into fish farming doesn't make sense because all the species that they would farm would be for export, not for food security or for subsistence. So actually, if it wasn't through fisheries, it was going to be like they could already meet their needs for protein through wild caught fisheries, so it didn't make sense for them to be doing too much finfish farming of low cost species. So seaweed makes more sense. It's a lower entry point. They're already doing it. Their environment is well suited, and it's much better for the environment, as we know. It employs women and younger people, and it can be beneficial on a number of levels. So that kind of opened up a whole new work stream for us on seaweed, which I never anticipated. Like, when should a government invest more in seaweed, and when should it invest more in finfish farming? And that's one of my main projects for this year, to work with economists to answer those questions, using a whole bunch of different models and so on, because I think often governments push because that's just like the fashionable thing to do, like, yeah, let's farm fish, but without actually studying whether environmentally it's the best use of their resources. Do they have the right infrastructure? And if they do seaweed well, it can be profitable and it could be successful. Yeah.
Well, and good and better for the environment too, depending on what you have. Because, like, I have heard of studies looking at seaweed being cultured over seagrasses, and that affecting the seagrass beds. Even though it does well for the seaweed, but the seagrass beds aren't getting the light that they need, and they end up suffering. But also, when you have aquaculture, fish aquaculture, sometimes it's not as profitable for the whole time. And there's, like, Greece is going through some problems right now with abandoned fish farms and so forth. So there's always problems.
I didn't know that.
There's always issues when you look at how things are managed within a country, how the regulations are set up, and you don't want to just exploit something for the sake of exploiting when it may not be best for that. And it's good to have people like yourself and the people that work with you at Ethical Seafood Research, because it's you want to make sure you're doing it properly. Obviously the money has to be there, the revenue has to be there, it has to support jobs, but it also has to treat the country and their coastal areas or their lakes like properly, right? And I think that's what's best about having someone like yourself and ESR there to be like, oh, this is what we do. Like, this is what we're looking out for you as well, as your people and the environment. And so
that's definitely what we try to do. Sorry, Andrew, I realized that I went off on a bit of a tangent on seaweed because I'm like getting more.
Yeah, of course, no worries. No worries.
But I guess the part that I really wanted to mention is that what differentiates us, I think, from others in this space is that we're very much like on the ground. We have our teams on every country that we operate in. We're farming. Right. We're focused. We're actually trying to work with the people who are closest to the fish. We're not like the policy stuff is like secondary, but really our bread and butter is that I work with aquaculture experts. They've all studied aquaculture. They understand exactly how to farm fish in the best way, and so I think we go in there from a technical perspective, or we're veterinarians as well, right? So that's, I think, really our bread and butter is producer facing. Small scale subsistence farming. Oriented. Yeah, that's all I want.
Yeah, very much community focused. Like in helping the community as well. And so sometimes, like you said, it might be fish that might help, or it might be seaweed, or it might be something else. You never know. And I think that's really great. What's so for the organization? Obviously, a fairly new organization. What are your hopes in the future, like, to direct this organization, and where do you hope that you can be like best helpful, for communities and countries and so forth? Like, what do you have on the horizon, or what are you hoping to accomplish on the horizon?
So seaweed was a big one, definitely, for us. That kind of came out of nowhere. That I'm really not sure. Well, I think the sky's the limit in terms of where we can go, just because there's so much excitement and funding being thrown at that. But it's a bit of a learning curve for me, because I actually don't know too much just about how. Like, it's actually quite a whole field in itself. I know a lot about animals, but I don't actually know too much about the botanical aspect of agriculture. Yeah. So that's becoming a bigger aspect of our work. We haven't talked about it at all in our chat today, but caviar farming is something that I've also received. So actually, when you're talking earlier about like the zoo, for some reason I started thinking of like sturgeon and like I was watching big out videos. Here. Yeah, huge. I was watching some videos of like these like sterlets, like the baby sturgeon being released. And I was like, man, if enough people saw just like how amazing these fish were, like the caviar industry is actually responsible for a fair bit of cruelty, really, and it's something that I've published about in the last couple of years. And I have a ongoing project with someone from UBC Animal Welfare Department. Well, she's a graduate from there. We like interviewed producers to see how we can do things better.
Interesting.
It's not a huge area of work for us. It's just something I came to mind when you were talking. Other, I guess we have we're trying to work with governments to develop codes of practices on farm fish welfare in Africa. So we have the Kenyan government invited us to develop one for them, which would be something that, well, voluntary, but we believe that the industry will sign on. But that's kind of, so Africa, the thing about African aquaculture is it's the fastest growing in the world. So part of our focus to work there was that we get in there before like all these like bad practices that we see in salmon farming and all that gets like embedded. So through things like the code of practice, through early training, through steering the industry, towards good technologies from the get-go, I think we can have impact. So I'm excited about this approach of like, working, trying to incorporate high level approaches, not just, farmer work, as I mentioned. What else am I excited about for this year? I'm writing a book on like an academic book. Yeah, I was invited to write that. Yeah, so I guess on a personal level, it's always interesting because you end up learning loads.
Yeah.
So
it kind of adds to your credibility, right? As well as someone who's in this space and helping out countries and not only part of an organization, but putting your words to paper and teaching other people as well. So I think that's fantastic. Well,
and Andrew, actually, sorry, the Humane Slaughter Project I mentioned earlier, like if we can find or like refine a protocol, just for like using ice as an ice slurry to like emerge fish after taking them out of water in like the most humane way possible. If we can perfect that and adapt it so that people can use it easily, I think that could reduce a lot of suffering in a low cost, high impact way. So I'm very excited about the trials that are ongoing and that will continue to go on this year. So that's another thing that I see on the horizon. Sorry, I cut you off.
No. I mean, that's great because I was just about to just say thank you and everything, but that was awesome. I'm glad you told me about that because it's just the different ways that people are thinking about making sure that we're treating the animals more humanely, and so aquaculture, as we know, is one of the fastest growing fisheries in the world. It's slated to, if not already, serve about 50% of the population, like world population, probably more than that. In incoming, as you mentioned, African countries are probably the biggest growth of aquaculture in the continent overall. And so it's very interesting to be able to talk to you today about this, Wasim, and be able to, enlighten us on this type of work. I know we kind of covered a lot today and a lot of different things, but I'd love to invite you back on to talk about specific projects and dive deeper into it, into the science, and just to kind of give people a perspective of the type of research that's going on and how it ties to helping community. Because I find with conservation, it's really managing communities, right? And it's a big part of that. And because we do a lot of the disturbance, so if we're going to do a lot of the disturbance, we need to be managed. We need to do it right. And it's great to have yourself and your team to be out there and helping countries who are potentially new to this, different types of farming or just welfare of animals in general. Be interested and work with your organization to help it out. I want to thank you for your work, but I also want to thank you for coming and sharing your story with us.
No, I really appreciate that, and I'm always happy to come back and talk to your audience. It's been really, really a joy, as always, to talk about our work and to share. I just wanted to say, Andrew, that personally, like when I saw this like title of Speaking Up for the Blue, I was like, is our work a good fit? But I still want to like kind of go for it. I'm like, well, I'll
absolutely.
It's not oceans. It's not necessarily like the sexy marine biology stuff, but it's important, and it's an important part of the debate. And we're trying to get ourselves out there in different circles. Go ahead, yeah.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where, people are always asking, people are always asking about it. And although it's not like the major topics of today in terms of like you said, being sexy, like climate change and things like that, but it's something that we have to identify. It's not just all about, the major impacts that are hindering us, but it's also making sure that we're treating the animals properly in whatever we do. whether it's through experimentation, whether it's through aquaculture, whether it's through wildlife caught fisheries. The less impact we have, the more humane impact we have, the better. And I think that's a huge aspect to discussing and talking about the ocean. So I want to thank you so much for the work you do, and of course coming on the podcast, Wasim. It's been great to have you on.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, Wasim, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on. It was great to have a great conversation on ethical seafood, ethical treatment of seafood in particular. So fish welfare is not a conversation that we talk a lot about. It's a conversation that we should talk more about. And I think when that conversation arises, a lot of people think of like activism and advocacy, but there's a lot of science that can go into this type of research. Even like within the aquaculture industry, there's fish feed that you have to look at. How is the feed created? Like, how is it made? Where are the fish that are caught to make that fish feed? Are they being fished sustainably? Are they being treated properly? And the same with the fish in aquaculture pens, the same with the fish wild caught. Are we doing what we can to reduce the amount of pain, reduce the amount of problems that we are having on the ocean and on that particular fish that's being eaten? So it's a very interesting field of study, one that doesn't get talked about a lot. And I'm so happy to have Wasim on the podcast to be able to talk to him about it. So super happy that he's here. I'd love to hear what you have to think about fish welfare. Do you care? Do you not care? What do you care about in terms of fish welfare? Love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app on the audio part, love our audio listeners, because that's the first thing I did when I came into the podcast industry. I was dealing with audio, and I still love my audio listeners. You can go to speakupforblue.com/feedback. That's speakupforblue.com/feedback. And you can either put in a voice note or you can write your thoughts down, and I will get to read them and maybe share them later on if you so desire. But I want to thank you so much until then for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.